Kaler. 9 was never loud. It murmured in frequencies humans weren't built to hear. Deep, tonal hums spiraling from the harmonic towers like a lullaby for the broken. The execution square shimmered in sterile light, its floors sterilized of blood long ago. A man knelt, gaunt and trembling, words slipping from his mouth like dying birds. The dialect was forbidden, banned before his own daughter had been born. His voice faltered, but the Vrake didn't care. They watched. They listened. Then they erased. The body vanished in a wave of distortion, sucked into non-existence by the tower's pulse. The crowd didn't cry out. They never did. Silence had been bred into them like bone. Elias Merrick didn't blink. He translated the final decree in a monotone whisper, neural limiter suppressing all trace of emotion. A language master once feared across 10 systems. Now, just another voice in service of death. But in the crowd, someone was watching differently. She didn't flinch when the man disappeared. She wasn't looking at him. Lyra stood still, hands by her side, face expressionless. Her body was thin, brittle like dried wire, but her eyes were studying, following the Vrake commander's facial contractions, parsing the semiotic pulses they emitted through subharmonic breath. She watched how they gestured with precision too perfect for instinct. She absorbed it all. She didn't mourn. She calculated. Elias saw her. He had trained in 27 dialect families, mastered semantic warfighting. And he knew this child wasn't grieving. She was decoding. And that made her more dangerous than any rebel he'd seen in a decade. When they brought her in, she was bloodied but unbent. They called her a saboteur, a relic thief, a syntax risk. She had broken into the sub-archives beneath the administrative chambers, where even most Vrake wouldn't bother. She had tried to steal an ancient lexicon crystal, a decaying relic from the pre-ascendancy era. A dead thing, full of broken conjugation codes and deprecated grammar structures. Elias should have dismissed it. But she hadn't gone after food or escape codes. She had gone for language. They shoved her before Elias, demanding translation and judgment. But Lyra didn't plead. She pulled out a small, cracked tablet from her rags. Stylus shaking, she scratched a phrase with slow precision, like it had waited inside her too long. They can't hear lies if we say nothing. The room seemed to hold its breath. Elias read it once, then again. To the Vrake, every vocal emission, every breath, stutter, and emphasis was data. Silence wasn't resistance. It was void, unprocessable. This girl wasn't just mute. She was strategic. She was using silence the way he had once used words, as a weapon. The guards demanded immediate sentencing. Elias hesitated, then spoke a phrase he had sworn never to utter again. A clause buried in the dust of treaties long ignored. Section 7.9. Trinera delay. The Vrake commander clicked in disdain. Obsolete. Still binding. The silence that followed wasn't disbelief. It was discomfort. 3 days. That's all he could win. A buffer carved from old law, too obscure for current algorithms to override without escalation. He signed the documentation with a trembling hand. For the first time in years, Elias Merrick made the system stutter. Alone in his quarters, Elias poured himself synthetic fire and remembered the way Mira used to laugh. Before they changed her, his daughter had been a prodigy of resistance, an architect of countergrammar. She had tried to build a language the Vrake couldn't map, tried to outpace their parsing engines with recursive ambiguity. They found her. They rewrote her, until the day she stared at him blankly, whispering affirmations in perfect Vrake cadence. Then she was gone, and he buried everything. Now this girl, this silent stranger, had resurrected a ghost. Outside, the towers hummed louder. The harmonics were layered with encoded commands, suppression of unauthorized cognition, disruption of prelinguistic association. But inside, Elias listened to Lyra's words echo through his thoughts. No tone, no emphasis, just pure intention. He saw it now. To the Vrake, meaning was a cipher to break. But meaning without signal? Meaning without form? They couldn't track what didn't transmit. He remembered a theory he once feared to write, one his mentors called nihil linguistic warfare. Weaponized absence. This child was its first soldier. They had taken their voices, erased their dialects, mandated only the speech that could be mapped and monitored. But silence? Silence could not be owned. As the twin moons of Kaler, 9 rose, the towers hummed louder, trying to drown rebellion and noise. But somewhere in the dark, a girl sat cross-legged in her cell, drawing on a cracked tablet. Elias didn't know what she planned, only that silence was no longer retreat. It was revolution. She came into his custody on paper, a formality buried under layers of dead treaties and forgotten statutes. The Vrate processed it as a clerical glitch, a minor anomaly in a system designed to erase them all. Elias read between the lines. They'd made him her guardian, and if she deviated, they'd purge them both. But as they descended into the cold guts of his shelter, the traps ceased to matter. Lyra moved without noise, only the scrape of her worn boots on the metal grates. Elias had hidden here for years, surrounded by remnants of shattered tongues, banned phonemes, and the dusty syntax of civilizations crushed under the Vrake's linguistic blade. And now she drifted through it like a ghost, touching nothing but absorbing everything. She never spoke. She drew. Symbols, trees, spirals, and kinetic arcs covered his floor by morning. No grammar, no phonetics, just structure without sound. Elias stood over her work, breath hitching. She wasn't just designing a message. She was building an ecosystem. The silence broke with a slam. Then footsteps, deliberate and unafraid. Tava Quinn entered like a concussion wave, her frame still lean, her expression still cruelly precise. Neural scars crisscrossed her temple like lightning fossilized into flesh. She didn't ask permission. She never had. Her eyes found the girl instantly and narrowed. Quinn didn't trust easily. After what they'd lost, she didn't trust at all. This her? She muttered. Elias nodded. She's quiet, Quinn growled. She's listening. To what? To everything. Quinn activated her portable scanner, pulling a tangled mess of fringe cognition tech from her satchel. You're lucky I don't report you. You're luckier I'm curious. The scanner whirred, bathing Lyra's still form in pale light. Quinn watched the readings scroll past, her expression unreadable. You trust too easily, she said. That's how they broke us last time. Elias looked at Lyra, who never flinched under the light. She doesn't trust at all. That's why she might survive. The scan didn't produce what Quinn expected. No neural inhibitors, no trauma blocks, no linguistic pathways in the traditional sense. Instead, it showed something stranger. A mosaic of synesthetic cognition, unmapped cross-signals, intent processing overlays, sensory integration pathways that weren't part of the standard human neural matrix. Lyra heard tone as color, interpreted intention as motion. She wasn't processing speech. She was experiencing presence. Micro-expressions, breath rhythms, muscle twitches, they were her syntax. Meaning bloomed in her brain from the shape of stillness, not the noise of language. Quinn exhaled slowly. This isn't code, she whispered. It's evolution. Elias watched the monitors flicker, trying to imagine how this girl had survived indoctrination camps. Had silence protected her, or had it rewired her mind into something entirely new? Something the Vrake couldn't touch? He remembered how his daughter had screamed when they tried to change her. Lyra hadn't screamed. She had never needed to. The knock came without echo. The door opened without creak. Ser Vorkal stood in the threshold, tall and polished, every motion slow and calculated. His expression was a smile, a real one, if one could call a predator's grin sincere. His tone speech layered meanings like oil on water, each phrase delivered with overlapping semantic hooks designed to destabilize and manipulate. He called Elias a relic, a functionary, a clerk of corpses. He called the shelter quaint. He asked, almost playfully, if Elias remembered the purge protocols. Quotas will end soon, he purred. There will be no more need to monitor language. Elias said nothing. Vorkal turned, pausing just long enough to let the silence settle like ash. What we cannot parse, we eliminate. As he left, Elias glanced at Lyra. Her eyes shimmered, just for a second, not with fear, with calculus. Later that night, Elias found chalk lines on the far wall of the storage bay. At first glance, it was nonsense. Random loops and intersecting curves, slashes like scratches from a restless hand. Then he saw the timing marks, the directional indicators. Milo was hunched beside them, a stick of broken graphite in hand. 10 years old, silent as his sister. Lyra stood nearby, watching him. They never spoke, but their rhythm was perfect. Pulse intervals from the Vrake towers. Patrol gaps. Surveillance blind spots. Milo mapped them like a savant, and Lyra checked his angles with the precision of an architect. This wasn't hiding. This was communication. Elias felt the breath leave his chest. They weren't using words. They were constructing meaning from time, position, and intuition. A language woven from perception itself. He knelt beside the chalk lines, not to question them, to learn. She called a game. In the tunnels below the shelter, far from sensors and echoes, Lyra began to teach him. A blink, wait. A breath held, then released. Danger. A pattern of foot taps. Question. At first, Elias fumbled. Decades of linguistic training collapsed under the weight of simplicity. This wasn't about syllables or tense. It was about intent, presence. He missed cues, broke rhythm, misread silences, but each mistake sharpened him. His body remembered faster than his mind. Subtle muscle shifts, reflex timing. Gradually, his awareness spread beyond himself. He began to sense Lyra's messages without seeing them. He felt them. This wasn't code. It was communion. He wasn't learning a language. He was becoming part of one. The system grew daily. Milo integrated environmental signals, light flickers, shadow sweeps, temperature fluctuations. Lyra responded with tactile modulation, brushing fingertips across surfaces in patterns no Vrake surveillance could record. Together, they created a latticework of unspoken meaning. Quinn watched from the shadows, arms crossed, jaw tense. "What are we looking at?" Elias asked. "Ghosts speaking," she said. "They're transmitting in a medium the Vrake can't perceive. No sound, no script, no intercept point. Then it's invisible. It's unstoppable." Elias stared at Lyra, who now moved with effortless precision, syncing with her brother in choreographed bursts of signal. Each twitch, each step was a phrase. For the first time since Myra's death, he didn't feel like a broken man hiding in a grave of languages. He felt awe, and something sharper. Hope. She was building a language that couldn't be heard, and they would never see it coming. The towers above whined with static menace, broadcasting domination in every frequency. The purge countdown ticked silently. Orders were encoded in tone, cruel intentions layered under polite speech. But far below, in the hollow belly of Kaler 9, a different kind of speech was awakening. It had no voice print, no trace. It lived in breath, in blink, in pause. The Vrake believed silence was surrender. They were wrong, because this was not silence. It was the first cry of a rebellion they couldn't hear. And by the time they noticed, it would already be too late. The tunnels wound downward like the inside of a rusted lung. Every breath steeped in decay and old echoes. Tava moved with certainty, Elias trailing behind, heart pounding with something he hadn't felt in years. Anticipation. They passed collapsed girders, flickering glow panels, and old service bots rusted into prayer. Then, through a corroded hatch and past a hidden harmonic scrambler, the enclave opened like a secret folded into stone. 30 children moved within. No laughter, no whispers, only motion. Each step, each breath, synchronized not through command but communion. They weaved through each other with the elegance of instinct layered on design. Eyes met and parted. Hands flicked. A breath paused. Communication surged through them like current through skin. And at the center, Lyra, she wrote nothing, directed no one. Yet the flow bent around her like gravity around a star. Elias whispered, "Are you leading them?" She handed him a slate. "We don't need leaders. We just need not to be understood." His breath caught. This wasn't resistance. This was transformation. She hadn't built a rebellion. She'd given birth to a new species of language. They studied the children in silence, Tava leaning against rust-stained steel while Elias watched the motion patterns unfold. To most, it would look like chaos, but Elias saw structure, recursion, intent. Then he noticed something chilling. The children's communication mirrored Vrake military syntax. Not copied, inverted. Where Vrake command flowed from apex to subordinate in clean directives, Lyra's system diffused meaning from the periphery inward. Meaning was decentralized. Orders became suggestions, folded within loops of interpretive action. There was no clear origin, no focal point to kill. Elias traced gesture loops with his fingers, analyzing delays, redundancies, and the fluid response networks. This isn't just communication, he murmured. It's a virus for hierarchy. Tava raised an eyebrow. Say that again. They've created anti-command. Every signal resists clarity. Every phrase slows dominance. It's not defiance. It's entropy with intention. She frowned. He smiled. Passive resistance has never looked this aggressive. The Vrake tower vibrated with pure, invisible tyranny. Sarah Vorkel stood at the center of the harmonics chamber, hands folded, expression sculpted serenity. The prime harmonist tones layered above his own, low, tight, deliberate. Together, they sang the sentence of extinction. Lexoculus protocol. Activated. 48 hours. Then full shutdown of all unauthorized dialects across the system. After that came vocal sterilization. Nanite clouds tuned to vocal frequencies. Any human voice not registered would trigger deactivation, larynx erosion, neural language disconnection. Silent compliance, enforced by molecular precision. Vorkel watched as subdialects blinked offline. Clusters of human syntax collapsed in the data feeds. He smiled, thin and sharp. When they no longer speak, they no longer think. But beneath the feed, something stirred. Fractal noise, recursive signatures. Ghost data. He didn't notice, because he believed silence meant defeat. Back in the shelter, Elias moved like a man on fire. The Lexoculus countdown beat in his skull like a war drum. We offer Vorkel a glimpse, a partial decoding of Lyra's system, enough to buy time, a ceasefire, maybe sanctuary. Tava froze. You'd give them her mind? No, a fragment, just a scaffold. You'd sell her code for a cage we're allowed to whisper in. Elias snapped. If we don't, they'll erase every voice, starting with hers. Tava didn't shout. She didn't breathe. Then she opened a sealed containment unit. Inside, a neural core pulsed faint blue. Mira, she said. His heart stopped. She survived long enough to be archived. The rebels preserved her brain state before the Vrake destroyed her body. The silent code? Lyra didn't invent it. Mira did. Elias fell back, shaking. She helped build this. She was the match. Lyra's the flame. He had buried Mira in grief. But she had died fighting, and her voice had never truly gone silent. The chamber was soundproofed by 100 layers of interference fields. Vorkel stood with serene amusement as Elias approached, hands raised in offering. I bring you a partial structure, Elias said. The rhythmic logic. The symbol movement equivalency map. Enough to understand how it flows. Not enough to replicate it, Vorkel replied, almost fondly. No, good. He accepted the data capsule, interfacing it directly into his cranial port. His body barely moved, but his eyes fluttered, downloading, integrating. You think this will save them, he said. But empires are not defeated with symbols. They're silenced with compliance. He turned to leave. You always mistook complexity for power. But power is always the simplest thing, obedience. Elias stood alone in the silence, guilt chewing through him like acid. He didn't know he'd already delivered a weapon. Lyra greeted him without words. She only offered her slate. Did you give him something? His throat clenched. Just a fragment. Not the core. She nodded, as if this had always been inevitable. Then tapped her temple. He downloaded it? Yes. She scribbled slowly. Then he's infected. The realization struck like thunder. Flash. Vorkel mid-briefing, addressing the Harmonist Council. He opened his mouth to speak, but stumbled. The tones fractured. Meanings overlapped in corrupted bands. His harmonic field destabilized. One superior flinched. Another tilted in suspicion. Vorkel's smile twitched. He tried again, but no message resolved. The neural code wasn't language. It was a viral loop, embedded ambiguity, designed to confuse Vrake tone logic. A recursive misalignment of intent, injected into his cortex through Elias' betrayal. His own caste could no longer read him. And to a Vrake? That made him dangerous. Worse, unverifiable. A harmonist silenced from within. Vorkel's commands now triggered fail-safe loops and drones. His directives tripped panic states and subordinates. Every word he spoke corrupted the very system he served. The council debated in fractured tone waves, distorted by uncertainty. They couldn't strip him of caste without clear linguistic proof of deviation. But they couldn't trust his signals either. He became an unsolvable paradox. The infection spread, not the code itself, but the doubt. If one harmonist could be unreadable, and he could. Paranoia fractaled through the command lattice. Vorkel, once flawless, now stood mute in a chamber of staring eyes. He had tried to silence a child, but she had erased him from comprehension. Back in the enclave, Elias stared at her. She knew. She used me. Not with malice. With certainty. She never needed him to be loyal. She just needed him to deliver the loop. He thought he was tricking a child, but he never learned to listen without control. The enclave pulsed with motion, soundless and alive. Children weaved meaning through shared movement, encoded in glances and pauses. Lyra stood still, eyes closed, not commanding, not guiding, only perceiving. Above, the towers trembled. Commands faltered. The harmonics began to crack. Language, once the weapon of empires, had become a liability. Vorkel's collapse rippled outward, a chain reaction of unreadable authority. Silence redefined itself. Not absence, not surrender, but signal. A new language written in breath and time, built by children who had never been taught to fear the absence of sound. And through it all, Lyra listened. Not for words, but for patterns of power breaking apart. The Vrake hadn't just lost control. They had lost the ability to understand what control meant. And in the shadows of Kaler, 9, a new message began to take shape. Not in voice, not in script, but in something deeper, something unhearable and unstoppable. Lexoculla's protocol ignited in waves of unrelenting precision. From orbit to outpost, the Vrake towers exhaled fields of pure silence. Pulse ripples that devoured vibration and intention alike. The nullification of unauthorized sound struck like thunder wrapped in absence. Conversations vanished mid-sentence. Engines ceased humming. Sirens whimpered into stillness. Entire cities fell mute in less than a breath. Humans gripped their throats in terror, mouths moving without result. Vrake officers barked commands that dissolved before the air could carry them. Words died unborn. Panic surged, but no one could name it aloud. Above ground, chaos. Below, clarity. Lyra stood, unmoving as the pulse washed through her enclave. Around her, the children adapted instantly. No confusion, no fear. A shift in hand, a tilt in posture, command received. Response executed. Precision rippled through them like light across mirrored water. Elias watched, silent tears falling. The soundless world wasn't alien to them. It was home. The Empire had severed its greatest advantage, and in doing so, leveled the field. This was not the end. It was the threshold. The war didn't begin with gunfire. It began with a silence so profound, it spoke louder than any scream. The tower loomed. Its sonic fields collapsed, but its structure intact. A carcass of influence waiting to be gutted. The team advanced not like soldiers, but like a shared heartbeat. Elias, Tava, and Lyra, 3 minds in perfect nonverbal sync, slipped through a fortress designed to stop everything but the invisible. Retinal scanners pinged and accepted. Harmonic gates fizzled without resistance. They moved as one, a flick of Lyra's fingers signaling a delay. Tava responding with a timed nod. Elias trailing in flawless rhythm. No words were exchanged. None were needed. Guards, trained to respond to tonal anomalies, stared straight through them. Systems, tuned to detect voice sprint modulations, ignored them entirely. Their language lived between detection thresholds. When they reached the core chamber, rows of backup servers shimmered in sterile light. The data heart of Vrake control pulsed without sound, expecting no invaders in a world it now couldn't hear. Tava blinked slowly, a question. Lyra tapped her palm, confirmation. Elias whispered only once, like a man uttering a prayer. They were never guarding against this. In the center of the core, Milo stepped forward. 10 years old, unyielding. He held the glyph tightly, etched not into metal or glass, but into his understanding. A synthesis of motion, intention, and signal. The final piece. The keystone. Elias tried to stop him. Tava reached out with frozen breath. Lyra did neither. She met his eyes, tapped her chest twice. Their silent goodbye. Milo nodded once, then turned. He stepped into the core's harmonic loop, a shimmering band of refracted air and distorted light. It wasn't a killing field, not exactly. It was where sound once ruled. He held the glyph to his chest and released. No fire, no explosion, only brilliance. Light scattered like thought unshackled. Glyphs danced in mirrored spiral, refracting against control arrays, slicing harmonic regulators to pieces, not by force, but by making them question their own resonance. Then silence again. Where Milo stood, there was only absence, not emptiness. Purpose fulfilled. Tava collapsed to her knees. Elias bowed his head. Lyra stood still. She had no tears left, only resolve. Vorkal wandered the Hall of Echoes, once his sanctuary. Every surface designed to amplify tone, to transmit dominance. But now, silence met him like a wall. The harmonics refused to carry his words. Syntax faltered mid-delivery. Directives dissolved on his tongue. He tried again. Prepare. The words spiraled into feedback. He gasped as it bounced against the walls, altered and inverted, bleeding intent into gibberish. Then she appeared. Lyra, silent, still, terrifying. She held a crystal in her hand. A recording. Vorkal's own voice, captured and distorted by the syntax his empire once weaponized. She activated it. His commands poured into the chamber, twisted upon themselves. Loops, reversals, recursive degradation. The sound hit him not like noise, but like truth he could no longer escape. He screamed, not in rage, in fear. The harmonics that had obeyed him now recoiled. Sensors flagged his speech as anomalous. His cast protocols glitched. To the Vrake system, he had become something impossible. He fell, sobbing nonsense. Lyra didn't flinch. She walked past him with all the weight of inevitability. This wasn't vengeance. This was linguistic extinction. At the heart of the archive, Tava accessed the central terminal. Her fingers flew, entering codes older than betrayal and deeper than fear. Behind her, Elias stood watch. Lyra stood ready. The glyph language spun on the interface in glowing arcs. Tava uploaded the silent syntax. At first, the system resisted. Alarms blared in sub-frequencies, defense protocols ignited. But this code wasn't malware. It wasn't noise. It was fluency. As it unfolded, Vrake's systems didn't collapse. They transformed. Protocols meant to track tone adapted to movement. Surveillance lenses reinterpreted gesture as intent. Command channels warped into comprehension-less voids. Every order sent became an unresolved variable. Authority lost structure. Across the network, Vrake's soldiers shouted instructions that no longer found meaning. Officers repeated commands into silence. Screens blanked. Bots twitched. But in basements and tunnels, in ruins and enclaves, children blinked, nodded, tapped. The new language took root, not through violence, but through elegant dissonance. The Vrake had always feared rebellion. They never feared fluency. Until now, across Vrake-occupied systems, the collapse was silent. Patrols ceased responding. Drones hovered, awaiting instructions that could no longer parse. Officers bellowed tone commands into the air, only to receive stillness in return. Citizens wandered through motionless streets. The silence was deafening, not from absence, but from uncertainty. Symbols began appearing on walls. Not human, not Vrake, something born of both. Stacks of lines, loops with breath count indicators, arrows coded with movement patterns. Children explained them not with words, but by showing. Parents followed, not in protest, in practice. The Empire's weapons, their voice, their harmonics, their hierarchy, unraveled not under fire, but under comprehension they couldn't grasp. Control had always relied on understanding. Now, understanding belonged to someone else. The towers once designed to broadcast dominance now stood quiet. Still, their silence a monument. To failure, to evolution, to something beyond language. When the last voice fell, the first truth rose. We never needed to shout to be heard. Lyra stood at the tower's apex, looking down upon a world returned to stillness. Wind pressed against her skin. Light shifted across the ruins below. Machines blinked with confused obedience. People moved like whispers connected through breath, through rhythm. She held no weapon, spoke no command, and still the world moved around her. Not because of power, but because of trust. Because what they created didn't rely on domination or volume. It relied on meaning. The Vrake were never defeated by silence. They were undone by assuming silence meant nothing. But Lyra had shown them. Silence was everything. Not absence, not weakness, but potential. And in that final stillness, as towers stood mute and cities learned to breathe again, a new language began. Born not in rebellion, but in recognition of what it meant to speak, without ever needing to be loud. On Kalar 9, the collapse of Vrake authority left no triumphant speech, no raised banners, no declarations of surrender. The command cast dissolved not in blood, but in irrelevance. What came after were emissaries, cloaked in symbols of diplomacy, bearing words laced with desperation. They offered reparations, treaties, promises layered in regret. No reply came. Messages echoed unanswered. Transmission fields remained unoccupied. The silence that followed was not hostile, nor was it passive. It was sovereign. The towers that once bent reality with harmonics continued to hum, but the signal found no receivers. Their pulses wandered through empty bandwidths, like rulers speaking in voids they no longer owned. Across the ruins, humans moved with intention. Gestures carried weight. Blinks replaced orders. Shared silence became infrastructure. Communication still existed. It had merely evolved beyond comprehension. The emissaries waited, and watched, and realized at last what their empire could never fathom. Power now belonged to those who could not be understood. In a cavern carved by time and fire, Elias knelt before two memorial flames. The first glowed violet blue, Milos. The second, amber and slow-burning, Myris. No eulogies were spoken. None were needed. Tava approached silent. Her hands held a soft-wrapped bundle, Myra's preserved brain core. She placed it beside the compact housing etched with Milo's glyph interface, aligning them like twin stars frozen in circuitry. "They saved us," she said, voice catching, "by staying quiet when we would have screamed." Elias reached forward, placing trembling fingers over both cores. The warmth of stored memory pulsed faintly, like breath beneath skin. "I thought I was teaching them," he said, "but they taught us something I never dared to believe. That silence wasn't surrender. It was the key. No parade would honor them. No statue would be raised. But the language they helped forge now flowed through every hand signal, every shared glance across the broken city. Together, Elias and Tava sealed the chamber. Two lights flickered behind steel, not as endings, as echoes. The enclave gathered beneath a pale morning sky, the air still touched by yesterday's ash. Rows of children stood side by side, their eyes sharp, their bodies silent. They had not spoken in weeks, not since the towers fell, not since the old ways died in their circuitry. Lyra stood before them. She did not command. She existed. And then she breathed, not as a leader, but as a symbol. She opened her mouth. One word emerged. Begin. Soft, unforced, untranslated. The effect moved through the crowd like a tremor. No applause followed. No cheers. But eyes widened, spines straightened. The choice to speak, so rare now, held more weight than entire histories. This was not a call to war. It was an invocation, not of language as weapon, but of meaning as freedom. One syllable, unchained, and with it, a future stepped forward, barefoot, steady, silent no more, yet still not loud. In the observatory's broken shell, beneath shattered stars and exposed sky, Elias opened an analog journal, hand-stitched, scavenged from forgotten pages. No screens, no recording devices, just ink and memory. He titled it, The Last Grammar of War. Line by line, he wrote, The Enclave, the drills, the first time Lyra blinked a warning, Milo's glyph, Myra's core, the fall of harmonics. The day's silence reshaped the meaning of power. He did not write to teach. He wrote to remember, because language, even wordless, must be passed on. His pen trembled as he reached the final page. Below the silence, a world moved differently now. Towers no longer pulsed. Orders no longer bound. Only rhythm remained, human and more than human. The war had not ended with a victor. It had ended when noise was no longer mistaken for meaning. Elias looked out at the horizon, and on the final line, he wrote, We didn't win because we were louder. We won because we learned how to be heard without noise. We built a language they couldn't take. One wordless child at a time. The ruins of Kalar, 9 no longer smoldered. They bloomed. Children painted symbols along broken walls. Loops, spirals, arcs, gestures frozen in color. Adults followed their lead, not as rulers, not as rebels, but as learners. Hands replaced commands. Blinks replaced orders. Shared breath became the pulse of progress. Break observers stood among them, watching with wary awe. They did not speak. They could not. Not here. Not anymore. The old empire had crumbled in its own echo. The new world did not shout. It breathed. It blinked. It began. On a Vrake colony orbiting a pale gas giant, beneath the filtered glow of twin suns, children played outside the education dome. The dust court, meant for order drills and harmonic coordination exercises, echoed with something different. Not noise, not commands, something more deliberate. They moved in silence, eyes blinking in rhythm, shoulders shifting subtly, fingertips tapping smooth stones in precise, echoing patterns. To the harmonist instructor watching from the shade, it looked like chaos. Undisciplined, asynchronous. But to the children, each gesture was structure, each movement, meaning. A game, yes, but one with rules deeper than sound. One boy paused, glanced at 2 others, then tapped a rhythm across the cracked ground. The others responded instantly, adjusting their position like dancers shifting weight in invisible cadence. No speech, no signal, just pattern. The instructor stepped forward, voice taught. Communicate properly. Align your syntax. Speak or be removed. The children looked up, then down. One girl bent and drew in the dirt, a spiral flanked by 3 bars. The glyph, the one that once collapsed the system of control. The harmonist stiffened. The shape meant nothing and everything. It tickled the edge of archived protocols, the corner of training logs she was too junior to access. Still, her gut tightened. She summoned a drone. Its scanner passed over the glyph and blinked red. Unregistered semiotic pattern. Irregular. Non-compliant. Anomaly. The children didn't wait. No laughter. No whispers. They scattered with deliberate grace, like birds taking flight. Not fleeing discipline, but completing a routine. No sound passed between them. Just understanding. The instructor stood frozen, gaze lingering on the pattern now scuffed beneath dust and heel. She said nothing, filed no report, but she remembered, because what she had seen wasn't just misbehavior. It was transmission, a signal not taught through curriculum, but inherited through presence, a language of silence, and once received, never forgotten. Across the colony network, a surveillance AI flagged a phrase in its passive scan log. Pattern deviation detected in educational sector. The The entry was low priority. A junior researcher tagged it. No one responded in time. By then, the symbol had been scratched into other courtyards. Other children had begun blinking in rhythm. They couldn't explain why, but they felt it. They remembered something they never learned. They passed it without speaking, without meaning to, because the future wasn't written in sound anymore. It traveled in movement, in rhythm, in absence, a truth no empire could parse, a whisper without voice, a rebellion without speech. The silence had spread.